Hi, I'm Andrea Mackenzie, reading Chapter 4 of L.M. Montgomery's Jane of Lantern Hill. Of course, it was no time before grandmother knew about Jody. She made a great many sweetly sarcastic speeches about her, but she never actually forbade Jane going over to play with her in the yard of 58. Jane was to be a good many years older before she understood the reason for that. Understood that grandmother wanted to show anyone who might question it that Jane had common tastes and liked low people. "Darling, is this Jody of yours a nice little girl?" Mother had asked doubtfully. "She is a very nice little girl," said Jane emphatically. "But she looks so uncared for, positively dirty." "Her face is always clean, and she never forgets to wash behind her ears, Mummy. I'm going to show her how to wash her hair. Her hair would be lovely if it was clean. It's so fine and black and silky. And may I give her one of my jars of cold cream? I've two, you know. For her hands, they're so red and chapped because she has to work so hard and wash so many dishes. But her clothes? She can't help her clothes. She just has to wear what's given her, and she never has more than 2 dresses at a time. One to wear every day and one to go to Sunday school in. Even the Sunday school one isn't very clean. It was Mrs. Ballew's Ethel's old pink one, and she spilled coffee on it. And she has to work so hard. She's a regular little slave, Mary says. I like Jody very much, Mummy. She's sweet." "Well," Mother sighed and gave way. Mother always gave way if you were firm enough. Jane had already discovered that. She adored Mother, but she had unerringly laid her finger on the weak spot in her character. Mother couldn't stand up to people. Jane had heard Mary say that to Frank one time when they didn't think she had heard, and she knew it was true. "She'll go with the last one that talks to her," said Mary, "and that's always the old lady." "Well, the old lady's mighty good to her," said Frank. "She's a gay little piece." "Gay enough. But is she happy?" said Mary. "Happy? Of course Mummy is happy," Jane had thought indignantly. All the more indignantly because away back in her mind there was lurking a queer suspicion that Mother, in spite of her dances and dinners and furs and dresses and jewels and friends, wasn't happy. Jane couldn't imagine why she had this idea. Perhaps a look in Mother's eyes now and then, like something shut up in a cage. Jane could go over and play in the yard of 58 in the spring and summer evenings after Jody had finished washing stacks of dishes. They made their imaginary garden. They fed crumbs to the robins and the black and gray squirrels. They sat up in the cherry tree and watched the evening star together. And talked. Jane, who could never find anything to say to Phyllis, found plenty to say to Jody. There was never any question of Jody coming to play in the yard of 60. Once, early in their friendship, Jane had asked Jody to come over. She had found Jody crying under the cherry tree again and discovered that it was because Miss West had insisted on her putting her old teddy bear in the garbage pail. It was, Miss West said, utterly worn out. It had been patched until there was no more room for patches, and even shoe buttons couldn't be sewn any more into its worn-out eye sockets. Besides, she was too old to be playing with teddy bears. "But I've nothing else," sobbed Jody. "If I had a doll, I wouldn't mind. I've always wanted a doll. But now I'll have to sleep alone away up there, and it's so lonesome." "Come over to our house and I'll give you a doll," said Jane. Jane had never cared much for dolls because they were not alive. She had a very nice one which Aunt Sylvia had given her the Christmas she was 7, but it was so flawless and well-dressed that it never needed to have anything done for it, and Jane had never loved it. She would have loved better a teddy bear that needed a new patch every day. She took Jody, wide-eyed and enraptured, through the splendors of 60 Gay and gave her the doll, which had reposed undisturbed for a long time in the lower drawer of the huge black wardrobe in Jane's room. Then she had taken her into Mother's room to show her the things on Mother's table. The silver-backed brushes, the perfume bottles with the cut glass stoppers that made rainbows, the wonderful rings on the little gold tray. Grandmother found them there. She stood in the doorway and looked at them. You could feel the silence spreading through the room like a cold, smothering wave. "What does this mean, Victoria? If I am allowed to ask." "This is Jody," faltered Jane. "I brought her over to give her my doll. She hasn't any." "Indeed? And you have given her the one your Aunt Sylvia gave you?" Jane at once realized that she had done something quite unpardonable. It had never occurred to her that she was not at liberty to give away her own doll. "I have not," said Grandmother, "forbidden you to play with this Jody in her own lot. What is in the blood is bound to come out sooner or later. But, if you don't mind, please don't bring your riffraff here, my dear Victoria." Her dear Victoria got herself and poor hurt Jody away as best she could, leaving the doll behind them. But Grandmother did not get off scot-free for all that. For the first time, the worm turned. Jane paused for a moment before she went out of the door and looked straight at Grandmother with intent, judging brown eyes. "You are not fair," she said. Her voice trembled a little, but she felt she had to say it, no matter how impertinent Grandmother thought her. Then she followed Jody down and out with a strange feeling of satisfaction in her heart. "I ain't riffraff," said Jody, her lips quivering. "Of course I'm not like you. Miss West says you're people. But my folks were respectable. Cousin Millie told me so. She said they always paid their way when they were alive. And I work hard enough for Miss West to pay my way." "You aren't riffraff, and I love you," said Jane. "You and Mother are the only people in the whole world I love." Even as she said it, a queer little pang wrung Jane's heart. It suddenly occurred to her that two people out of all the millions in the world, Jane never could remember the exact number of millions, but she knew it was enormous, were very few to love. "And I like loving people," thought Jane. "It's nice." "I don't love anybody but you," said Jody, who forgot her hurt feelings as soon as Jane got her interested in building a castle out of all the old tin cans in the corner of the yard. Miss West hoarded her tin cans for a country cousin who made some mysterious use of them. He had not been in all winter, and there were enough cans to build a towering structure. Dick kicked it down next day, of course, but they had had the fun of building it. They never knew that Mr. Torrey, one of the 58 boarders who is a budding architect, saw the castle gleaming in the moonlight when he was putting his car in the garage and whistled over it. "That's rather an amazing thing for those two kids to build," he said. Jane, who should have been asleep, was lying wide awake that very moment, going on with the story of her life in the moon, which she could see through her window. Jane's moon secret, as she called it, was the one thing she hadn't shared with Mother and Jody. She couldn't, somehow. It was her very own. To tell about it would be to destroy it. For 3 years now, Jane had been going on dream voyages to the moon. It was a shimmering world of fancy where she lived very splendidly and sated some deep thirst in her soul at unknown enchanted springs among its shining silver hills. Before she had found the trick of going to the moon, Jane had longed to get into the looking glass as Alice did. She used to stand so long before her mirror, hoping for the miracle to happen, that Aunt Gertrude said Victoria was the vainest child she had ever seen. "Really?" said Grandmother, as if mildly inquiring what Jane could possibly have to be vain about. Eventually, Jane had sadly concluded that she could never get into the looking-glass world, and then one night, when she was lying alone in her big, unfriendly room, she saw the moon looking in at her through one of the windows. The calm, beautiful moon that was never in a hurry, and she began to build for herself an existence in the moon, where she ate fairy food and wandered through fairy fields full of strange white moon blossoms with the companions of her fancy. But even in the moon, Jane's dreams ran true to the ruling passion. Since the moon was all silver, it had to be polished every night. Jane and her moon friends had no end of fun polishing up the moon, with an elaborate system of rewards and punishments for extra good polishers and lazy ones. The lazy ones were generally banished to the other side of the moon, which, Jane had read, was very dark and very cold. When they were allowed back, chilled to the bone, they were glad to warm themselves up by rubbing as hard as they could. Those were the nights when the moon seemed brighter than usual. Oh, it was fun! Jane was never lonely in bed now, except on nights when there was no moon. The dearest sight Jane knew was the thin crescent in the western sky that told her her friend was back. She was supported through many a dreary day by the hope of going on a moon spree at night. That ends Chapter 4 of Jane of Lantern Hill. Thanks for listening, and see you again.